Let's pop back over into Bridge. And here in our Chapter 1 Dancer folder, next to our ballerina, you'll see this very strange-looking thumbnail called Ernst Haeckel 1.jpg. I assume this is pronounced Haeckel. I've never actually heard it pronounced out loud. But Ernst was a German biologist from the 19th century who became quite famous for many different things. He developed a lot of the classifications of animals that we use today. He came up with a very famous theory of embryonic development called ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which I'm not going to explain now, but it'll blow your mind if you don't know anything about it. And he also became quite famous for his gorgeous detailed illustrations of the animal kingdom. He was one of those people that would go out and identify new species and draw detailed pictures of them. Well, fortunately, a lot of those pictures have ended up in the public domain. This one, for example, this is a detail of a print probably long ago harvested out of a book. This print dates back to 1862. 1862, of course, as you all know, is exactly 100 years before I was born, and so therefore this is very comfortably in the public domain. So let's pop it open into Photoshop. And let's get a close look at what we're dealing with here. This is really rich stuff. This guy was a tremendous, tremendous artist. His pictures were not only useful for biologists to study, but they're also really just beautiful as works of art. The detail is amazing. And I love using source materials like this, specifically of biology, because it has a very kind of natural feel to it in that it's describing these intricate biological structures. But it also has a very hand-drawn feel to it because, well, it is. So you can actually do lots and lots of fun stuff making textures with source materials like this in Photoshop, and that's exactly what we're going to do now. So let me go back to full screen here. Let's give ourselves a little bit more room to work. And I chose this image because of these structures right here. This kind of pine tree shaped segment over here on the right, and a more complicated version of it over here on the left. But I like the structure of these branching shapes. I'm going to use this to create what looks a little bit like fiery cracks in lava. That's going to become the texture of our dancer. So we can quickly isolate these elements and get rid of the rest. Let's do that very, very rapidly. I'm going to grab my lasso tool here, and I'm going to hold down the Option key and click, 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 click. Command or Control J to float that. I don't care about the name because we're going to be combining all of these elements together. I'll jump back over to my background again. Click, add the Option key or the Alt key on Windows. Click, click, click. Jump that to a new layer, back to our background, come over here. Grab this stuff here. Float that to a new layer. And one more time to the background. And float this junk to a new layer. So now we have these bits and pieces that we're going to combine together. Let me work from the top down. So with the layer selected, I'm going to hit Command-T on the Mac, Control-T on Windows. To bring up our transform marquee for this layer, you'll recognize it, I'm sure, by now, by the little control handles on the outside. This is, of course, how you distort a layer if you want to. Add the Command key or the Control key on Windows to distort it in perspective. We don't want to do either of those things. So let me hit the Escape key and Command-T one more time. In fact, we're just going to right-click and choose Flip Vertical on this layer and return. Go to the second layer. I'm going to hold down the Command key to get our Move tool, and I'm just going to click and drag this over to the left so they're kind of stacked on top of each other. To the topmost layer, I'm going to say Darken. We don't want to multiply because there's a little bit of gray in the white, and you'll see some color in the overlap that we don't want. We're just going to choose Darken, and that's going to allow these layers to kind of combine themselves together. And now that they're blended, I'm going to hold down the Command key, and with the arrow keys, I'm just going to nudge this layer around a little bit until the cracks are pretty close to each other, but not really overlapping. This is good. I like this shape. Okay, so this is kind of what we're trying to create. If If you're following along, just come up with something roughly close to this. It doesn't have to be exact, not by a long shot. This is an artistic process. Feel free to freeform a little bit. So let's follow those same steps. I'll jump down here to layer 3. I'll transform. And this time, while I will flip vertically, I will also try to straighten up this rectangle a little bit, because that'll become useful to us down the road. I'm just trying to get this edge of it straight. I'll hit return, and now jump back to layer 4. Command key, Control on Windows, drag this layer over. Let's transform it a little bit as well, straighten it up. Hit return or enter. Once again, darken. And we're going to do the same thing with the arrow keys. Command key held down to nudge it around. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so I want to mush these layers together. So let's go all the way up here to layer 1. And with that selected, hit Command E. That will merge that layer down to the layer below. Now I'm going to select layer 3, do the same thing. Then I'm going to bring these layers pretty close together. Let's get rid of the background. And let's crop these guys so that our canvas isn't any bigger than it needs to be. And because I'm going to be applying the same effects to both of these elements, and I don't want to have to repeat the effort, I'm actually going to merge these two together as well, albeit briefly. I'm going to be lifting them one at a time out to paste into the other document. But for now, just to affect everything at the same time, once again, Command E, and now we've brought everything onto a single layer where we can now apply some effects to this and make it sort of a fiery lava-style texture. Everything we do to this image from this point out is going to be based on filters, really. So let's zoom this way in and give ourselves a nice view of the screen. Hit Command 1 or Control 1 to zoom to full screen. And if we pan over and give ourselves a nice detail, say upper left, this will allow us to see results while we're working on filters elsewhere on screen. So you can see the nature of this photo. It has picked up a lot of the printer's dots. You can see that there's just tremendous kind of hand-dotted grayscale in here that just represents amazing work. But we want things to look a little bit more realistic than this. So we're going to apply some levels and some blurs and a little bit of color manipulation to make this a little bit more interesting than what you see right here. Now, we're not going to be able to keep this non-destructive for long, but while we're tweaking and noodling around with these effects, it's still best to try to keep things as live as possible. So let's come over and turn this into a smart object, just so we can apply a live effect to it and be able to go back and tweak a little bit until we're happy. And the effect we're going to apply is Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And let's set that to a value to start with of about 6. Click OK. Now come down to our adjustment layers and apply levels. I realize we could do this with curves as well. I'm just going to brute force this with levels. And what we're going to do is we're going to crank our levels down to a very narrow range. And what we're trying to do is create something like this, where we're completely blowing out the white areas. We want those ultimately to be black, but we're going to invert things in just a second. Really what we're trying to create is an effect that smooths out these cracks and makes them look more organic. And we're getting pretty close to that now. But we don't want to lose too much detail. Let's start with that for now. And this is a good exercise in why it's best to keep things live, because we might want to go back and adjust some of these settings in just a moment. Let's close down our adjustments here, reopen our layers, and just so we don't get distracted by a bridge back there, I'm going to go up to my Photoshop menu and choose Hide Others. There we go. Now bridge has gone away. And let's come back over and apply another adjustment layer, Gradient Map. Now, Gradient Map basically remaps the tonal values of the pixels in an image according to a gradient. And the end result that you see here is we seem to have gone completely grayscale as the lightest pixels get mapped to the white on the right end of the gradient, and the darker pixels get mapped to the black on the other end of the gradient. Well, we can start playing with this gradient and do some fun stuff. If we click on it, I'm just going to very quickly make a custom gradient where on the far right, we're going to just quickly choose a black. Now our whole screen has gone black. On the far left, click here and choose a red. Now we have these red cracks on black. A little ways in here, click again, and let's choose a yellow. And then hold down the Option key on the Mac, Alt key on Windows, and drag the red over to about here. You can see now what this is allowing us to do. We're essentially creating some red, a little bit of yellow, so some kind of fiery texture in here. That's going to serve us pretty well. Let's leave that for now and go back out, and because we have a smart object, let's readjust our Gaussian blur down and see if that gains us anything. Yeah, I think it does, actually. I think we took it up probably too high. So let's click OK. Let's readjust our levels. Once again, this is a pretty artistic process. Oh, there we go. That's what I'm looking for. Perfect. That's exactly what I'm after. Something that looks like nice smooth cracks, but with what looks like lava or coals kind of peeking through them. Really, really pretty. We can zoom out a little bit and see that that's applied itself across all of our texture, and that's really nice. Now let's apply a little bit of glow to this. And this is a pretty old recipe, so I know I can safely smoosh all of this down. I'm going to select all of our layers here, make them into a smart object. There we go. I'm going to duplicate the layer, and to the topmost copy, once again, apply Gaussian blur. This time, let's crank the pixels up a little bit. Click OK. Now, what did we just do? We kind of messed up our texture, right? Well, yes, until we start playing around with our blend modes. And if we come up here to screen, you'll see that our fire is starting to glow a little bit more. And this is one of those things where it just starts to get kind of ugly, but it really does work. And that is make a few more copies of this layer so that the blurred add effect layers on top of itself and gives us this real fiery kind of glow effect. You can even go in and vary the Gaussian blurs a little bit if you like, so that you can make them not all be the same value. And ultimately we'll end up with something that looks about like this. Let's do one more copy, shall we? Good deal. Really, really pretty. Nice fiery veins. Looks very organic. It all started out, remember, from a pen and ink drawing from 1862, and we've converted it into these nice little fiery veins that are now going to become a texture for our fire sprite. We are, unfortunately, at this point, going to have to flatten all of this down into real pixels, however, because we're going to be doing something to this layer in our other Photoshop file that requires actual pixels and doesn't work with smart layers. So I'm just going to select all of these layers, Command-E. We've now smooshed them all down into one single layer of actual pixels, where I'm going to select all, copy, jump over into our ballerina file, and choose paste. There they are. Let me zoom out just a little bit, hit Command-T or Control-T on Windows so that we can adjust the scale of things. And I'm going to scale these things down so that at least I can see one of the slices at a time. Hit Return. Once again, grab our selection tool, Option click, select one of the two panels, and this time I'm going to go Command-Shift-J or Control-Shift-J on Windows to cut the selection to a new layer, meaning I did not leave a copy of it on the original layer. And that means my layer 1 and my layer 2 are now two separate and discrete layers inside our Firesprite file, ready for us to move on to the next steps.